I want to officially welcome you. I'm so glad you're here. I'm thrilled to be here. And I'm so happy that you're joining us for hopefully now and for periodically throughout these 3 days of our Afro-Diasporic Opera Forum. Welcome to Act 1, Scene 1. And we're going to start with some opening comments I have just to give you a sense, the lay of the land. And then we'll move on to a panel discussion with two of my wonderful colleagues who are really on the forefront of thinking about opera, Blackness, and voice today. We have Dr. Matthew Morrison and Dr. Fredara Hadley. And on an earlier version of the program, I want to say I'm so sorry that, but due to some unforeseen circumstances, Dr. Daniel Dowd is not able to join us now, and she might be able to send in some comments later on. As we're starting, I want to thank Dr. Ross Carr and Bridget Bergen, who have invited me into this space to help contextualize the works that we're putting together for this forum. I also want to thank the International Contemporary Ensemble, who is hosting and sponsoring this event in partnership with Fringe Arts and Opera Omaha. I see my role here is to be a guide right now and to introduce some of the central themes and ideas that have emerged as we've put this conference together, to say a few words to help circumscribe the big picture, as well as to find a way in. I will start with some of the larger, more historical and contextual comments and these elements, and then move into the logistics of the conference. Moving into the panel with my colleagues, I will briefly introduce them before their remarks. One of the things that makes this conference special is that it brings together three elements that are not usually seen together: opera, contemporary new music, and Black composers, librettists, and subjects. For many people, and I'm including performers, composers, educators, audience members, for many of us, these three topics could feel daunting. In fact, any one of these subjects might make some people say, let's save those for another day. I'd rather binge on Beethoven and barbecue or whatever else you find that's good. Yet we're living in a time where our lives have been turned around and we have new norms that bring together things that have usually been kept apart. During this COVID pandemic across the globe, we've been united by this terrible virus. And yet, despite the shared situation, we've all been isolated, socially distanced, as we toggle between internet connectedness and physical separation. Psychologically, we've been through tough waters, and it's easy to feel as though some of our humanity, that which makes us feel fully human, has been sacrificed as we've done our best to just stay alive. Now, this sounds like a rather heavy opening, and I'm doing this intentionally since I'm outlining what is at stake. As some of you know, I'm originally from New York, right outside of Manhattan. I grew up in Croton-on-the-Hudson, and I noticed that there are a bunch of folks from last night's prologue who are from the Hudson Valley, Kingston, and other areas. I grew up in Croton-on-the-Hudson, and then I spent my very formative college years in the city at Barnard College. I was based on the Upper West Side. In fact, the Barnard Columbia campus kind of postpones Harlem, as there are Columbia dorms and classrooms that go up to 121st and maybe even higher streets. Moving east towards Morningside Park, the world of Columbia connects to a different terrain. While I was there in the mid-late 1980s, these differences were striking, and Harlem felt very different from the area around Barnard. As I came more into contact with the writers and movement around the New Negro, the Harlem Renaissance, I gained a greater sense of the importance of that place. I remember when I first read Alain Locke's groundbreaking New Negro anthology from 1925 and being so blown away by the range of disciplines and types of knowledge that were included: philosophy, poetry, sociology, economics, literature, music, visual arts. As I was getting to know the participants in the Harlem Renaissance, I noticed how the arts were celebrated and not relegated to a secondary position. I saw that a central tenet of the Harlem Renaissance ideology was to include the arts: music, visual art, theater, dance, literature. All of these provided the humanity inherent in Black people. The Harlem Renaissance was propelled by those in the first generations after emancipation and Reconstruction. Moving past the categorization of being seen as chattel, property, a critical strategy of those early born-free generations was to help white people see them as human. A wonderful way to do that is through the arts, which gets people to laugh, feel empathy, get angry, and feel moved by emotion. Surely, and I think this is such a brilliant strategy, if those descended from slave owners and the wide range of folks who benefited from a white supremacist system, surely the encounter with and emotions brought on by the arts would help shape new ways of seeing Black folks. These are the items needed to let the oppressors realize that they are oppressing a part of themselves while they adhere to a white supremacist ideology. This is where we get to see that we are all connected, despite our sometimes radically different experiences in society. As the United States has had to recover and face the legacy of slavery, so too have countries in Europe had to come to grips with their own colonial histories. Reaching across the Atlantic, the Negritude movement began in the 1930s among French-speaking, Paris-based African and Caribbean writers, just as the colonial enterprise was crumbling and fell apart after World War II. Leopold Senghor, who became the first elected president of the Republic of Senegal in 1960, along with Aimé Césaire and Léon Damas, formed new ways of embracing African culture to center it and have it not be considered inferior to Western aesthetics. As these writers, along with Frantz Fanon and other post-colonial theorists, rewrote Black people into Western culture, the arts were seen as essential to the core mission. These are the big points I want to make while we get ready to embark on an incredible journey these next few days as we think about, listen to, and meet the creators of important new works that are outlining critical directions. A central theme that we'll uncover is that opera has become a surprising space for articulating what we are going through today. And I'll say that once more because this is one of the big moments that I've realized as I was thinking about these works. Opera has become a surprising space for articulating what we are going through today. Moving into the present, I want to outline a specific space we occupy today. The Black experience has been charted by many people who want to neatly forge forward, skimming over the horror and shame of the past. Historical narratives have tended to minimize the longevity of the afterlives of slavery and colonialism. Recently, however, we are getting new narratives, such as Nicole Hannah-Jones's 1619 project that appeared in the New York Times Sunday magazine in August 2019. And that work center stages Black experience by providing a telling of the beginning of the United States from a Black vantage point. Afrofuturism, a movement that has gained widespread appeal through the paradise of Wakanda in the 2018 film Black Panther, is only one expression of the alternative dreams of a future that celebrates Black wisdom and creativity. I could spend a lot of time delving into other works that have been envisioning worlds that center an Afro-Diasporic space that both provides models of a future and a commentary on the present. Former Harvard constitutional law professor, the late Derek Bell, wrote a series of chronicles in his 1987 book, And We Are Not Saved, The Elusive Quest for Racial Justice. And I want to spend just a couple of moments on this. I got to know Derek Bell in my first year, or I got to know about Derek Bell. I met him a couple of times, but do not consider to have known him really well personally. But he made a huge impression on me in my first year in graduate school. I was studying musicology at Harvard in Payne Hall, which was named for New England composer John Knowles Payne. And Payne Hall was right next to the law school. One of my friends from college, who was also new to Harvard that fall, she was in the law school, and she told me about the energies there to tenure a Black woman law professor. And this was any Black woman law professor, because in 1989, Harvard had never had one. There had been a few visiting female law professors who had taught there. Derek Bell was a civil rights activist before he joined Harvard, and he was their first Black law professor to be tenured at Harvard. This was in 1971. Now, at that point I'm talking about, in 1989, he was outspoken about the need for Harvard to tenure Black women on their faculty. Lonnie Guinier became the first tenured woman of color on Harvard's faculty. And from Wikipedia, I learned that she was granted tenure in 1998, 9 years after our demonstrations in 1989. Getting back to my experience with his book, And We Are Not Saved, Derek Bell took an unpaid leave of absence from Harvard when, amidst student protests, he put muscle behind his words to put pressure on Harvard's law school to tenure a woman of color. Harvard held out, and Bell's unpaid leave of absence lasted for 2 years before he joined the faculty at the law school of NYU and left Harvard permanently. And Derek Bell passed away in 2011. In my first year at Harvard, I remember learning about the situation at the law school from my friend and joined in some of the protests and events. Looking back, I guess it's not surprising that I felt a lot of solidarity, not necessarily with the law school, but with the movement to tenure a Black female professor. I remember hearing Bell's remarkably soft and gentle voice as he read from his work, And We Are Not Saved, as well as from what became his next book, Faces at the Bottom of the Well, The Permanence of Racism, that was published in 1992 after he left Harvard. Bell's work was the first time I had seen allegory used to express topics ranging from civil rights, Black voting power, and affirmative action to reparations and decolonization. Though Derek Bell called this type of writing fantasy, stemming from fairy tale, today we can see his provocative thought experiments, as he would call them, fit into the larger frame of what was to anticipate or what anticipated and what was to become Afrofuturism. Science fiction seems to have become a kissing cousin with Afrofuturism, especially in the work of Octavia Butler. As some of you might know, one of Butler's most renowned books, Parable of the Sower from 1993, has recently been adopted into an opera by folk blues musician Toshi Reagan in collaboration with her well-known mother, Bernice Johnson Reagan, singer, composer, and founding member of the a cappella all-female ensemble, Sweet Honey and the Rock. From Beyonce's 2016 album Film, Lemonade, to Jordan Peele's 2017 film Get Out, it is clear that Black folks have trenchant, unique, and original ways of self-representation. I want to assert that in addition to these new spaces in popular culture through literature, music, and film, opera has become a space for re-envisioning Blackness, no longer tied to minstrelsy stereotypes or traumatic victims, or no longer exclusively tied to minstrelsy stereotypes or traumatic victims, because we know that that happens in other places. The Black characters and situations presented in the operas included in this forum create narratives that are both new and familiar as they resonate deeply with our real lived experiences. Now that I have outlined first how art, and in our case, opera, makes us more human, second, how the pandemic around COVID has made us desire these opportunities to share our humanity, and third, how the Afro-Diasporic operas we are exploring this week are the panacea for helping us solve all of our racial problems. Yeah, if only. But I think we're ready to jump in a little bit deeper to a quick overview of our schedule and the specific works we'll be covering. But first, and on a serious note, I want to say something that ties us today to some of the larger themes this week. This Afro-Diasporic Opera Forum is taking place exactly 1 year after George Perry Floyd Jr. was murdered on May 25th, 2020 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Our opening event last night on the evening of Tuesday, May 25th, 2021, brings us pause as we think about this very difficult year. During this week, we will remember where we were when we first heard this horrific news, and as things have unfolded over this past year. And George Floyd is tragically one of too many Black people who've been killed, sacrificed, murdered, and martyred. Emmett Till, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Gardner, Sandra Bland, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. You know, this list goes on and on. And my recitation just now includes only a few of the names of so many people who died directly as a result of police misconduct. The organizers of this forum did not plan this event in response to or because of George Floyd. Rather, this forum was already in the making, as the need to bring light to Black voices writing operatic works presented an important opportunity to hear new narratives in contemporary music. From the organizers of this symposium and many of us involved, George Floyd was and continues to be a regular part of our daily thinking as we drive in cars, walk in neighborhoods, go grocery shopping, and seek medical care. The works on our program both directly touch on violence to Black people in our current lives, such as DWB, Driving While Black, DWB, Driving While Black from 2020, and the legacy of colonialism, The Nubian Word for Flower, a Phantom opera from 2017. These operas address the struggle and celebration of Black creativity. We see this in Pearl Noir, Meditations for Josephine from 2017, and Afterward from 2015. These operas also explore urban life in the Third Ward of Houston, Texas, Cry of the Third Eye from 2020. Right now, and at points throughout this week, we urge you to take the space and the time to be good to and gentle with yourself as we discuss these works, and commemorate the difficult legacy of George Floyd and so many others. I want to move on to what we're doing today and sort of focus on the schedule. The International Contemporary Ensemble website under the Afro-Diasporic Opera Forum section has a lot of information for navigating this 3-day forum. The schedule of events, specific information about each opera, and the biographies of the participants are all there. And feel free to click on the pictures and the little tags underneath, and those will give you more information. You need to register for this conference to receive the links, as you already know, and you will get them in your email each day. And we need to do this to protect our space and avoid Zoom bombings and other unfortunate things like that. So let's take a few moments to look over the schedule of this Afro-Diasporic Opera Forum in terms of the works being discussed and the outline of the program. And what I've done is I've mentioned their names before, and I'm going to, this might feel a little redundant, but we've got 5 incredible works, and I want you to get more familiar with them by hearing them. So please forgive me if this seems like I'm saying their names a few times. We've learned saying names is a good thing. We've organized this conference as 5 operas and 3 acts. Okay, how can I resist the connection to Virgil Thomson and Gertrude Stein's 1928 all-Black cast opera, 4 Saints and 3 acts? Yet rather than about 20 saints in at least 4 acts for Thomson and Stein's opera, we're going to stick to presenting the 5 operas over the 3 days of our forum. On the schedule, we have used the construction of labeling each day as an act and then each event as a scene. So right now we are in Act 1, Scene 1. Please note that there are pauses in between most of the scenes, and that's intentional. This is a conference that builds in many generous breaks, usually 30, 45, or 60 minutes. So you can eat and do a few other things throughout each of these 3 days. All 5 operas are contemporary works, and by contemporary, I mean recent. They were all completed and first performed between 2015 and 2020. All of the works, were written and composed and performed by all Black or primarily all Black, groups of primarily Black artists. So the stories being told in each operatic work focus on Black vantage points and experiences. In this forum, 4 of the 5 operas will be available through streaming during our time together. Due to the copyrights and protections of our artists, there are various amounts of time and availability for each work. So I'm going to quickly go over this now, and this information is also provided on the conference website. So today, Wednesday, May 26th, Act 1, we have we have 2 operas that we will be featuring. Act 1, Scene 2 is a conversation about Pearl Noir, Meditations for Josephine from 2017. The libretto and music is by Taishan Sori, and there are added words by the renowned cultural poet Claudia Rankin. This is a work that explores the life, music, and legacy of Josephine Baker. In this session, it is a conversation between the composer, Taishan Sori, the singer, Julia Bullock, and me. In this pre-recorded interview, there are a few short clips of the work, and that is the only place where you'll be able to see Pearl Noir Meditations for Josephine in this conference. Hopefully, you'll be able to see it at a venue near you when things open up more. This evening, Act 1, Scene 4, there's a screening of Afterward from 2015. The libretto and music is by George Lewis, and this is a work that explores the roots to and the beginning of the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, the AACM, in the 1960s. Tonight marks the YouTube premiere of Afterward, and that will be at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and this is all in your schedule. Now, if you are not able to watch this this opera this evening, where we will be all together and typing in the comments, that's okay. We'll miss you, but you will also be able to watch it for the rest of the conference. The links are on the schedule and in the morning Zoom links. The YouTube link, I think, will also be on Slack. After the conference, this is a wonderful thing. Afterward, will continue to be available, and you will find out the logistics for this will be sent to you in a conference follow-up email. Thursday, tomorrow, May 27th, Act 2, Scene 4, there will be the screening of The Nubian Word for Flowers, a phantom opera from 2017. This has a libretto by Ione, and the music is by the late Pauline Oliveros. She had actually completed the music before she passed. This is a work that is based on the history behind the colonist ventures of Lord Horatio Herbert Kitchener, who was a British Army officer and colonial administrator. Active in Southern Africa, particularly around the South African Anglo-Boer Wars. Kitchener was also active in British India and Egypt. This opera visualizes Kitchener's Nubian ventures through Egypt and the Sudan. With musicians from the West, Egypt, and Sudan, this work brings together Western and Egyptian acoustic instruments, as well as an electronic soundscape that has become a part of Pauline Oliveros's sound. The YouTube premiere of The Nubian Word for Flowers, a phantom opera, will be at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, again in the schedule. If you are not able to watch it this evening with us all together, you will be able to watch it for the rest of the conference. The links are on the schedule and in the morning Zoom links. And the YouTube link will also be on Slack. So like Afterwards, The Nubian Word for Flowers, a phantom opera, will continue to be available, and this information will be sent to you in a conference follow-up email. Friday, May 28th, our third act, Act 3, Scene 2, the screening of DWB, Driving While Black from 2018, has a libretto by Roberta Gumbel and music by Susan Kander. That YouTube premiere in this conference will be 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Friday, May 28th, and that link will be available for 24 hours. So from Saturday when we watch it from Friday, when we watch it, and for the next 24 hours. Sadly, it'll disappear on Saturday. Later on Friday, there is Act 3, Scene 5. There's the screening of Cry of the Third Eye from 2020. And this will, with the music and the production by Lisa E. Harris. The YouTube premiere is Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and that link will be available for 1 or 2 days. You'll find out exactly in the email. So most of these operas are, you get to see them with us live, and most of them will be available for a little or a lot of time afterwards. And that is just one of the centerpieces of what the International Contemporary Ensemble does. So rather than spending time outlining each session or scene, which is what we did in the prologue, and you can certainly do that on your own looking at the calendar, I just want to, in the schedule of events, I want to talk about 3 types of events in this forums, just so you get a sense of sort of the larger picture. There are, as I just described, screenings of new works. We have 5 new works. There are panel discussions, which will follow my remarks in just a couple of moments. And there are also solo presentations, sort of featured keynote discussions. So throughout this forum, we're sort of pulling in all these great things of performance and conversation and a few scripted comments, but all of it is to get sort of to the heart and essence of different ways of experiencing these new operas. Also, as some of you might know or already found, you have hopefully all had an invitation to join Slack. This is a communication tool, an instant messaging system that can span over the life of the conference, unlike the chat and Zoom, which is wonderful. And I'm just, I want to read them all and get to know them more. So I will be looking at them more. But while the chat and Q&A for in Zoom, unlike that, which are just connected to each event, Slack has the capability to cover threads throughout our 3 days. All right, I am going to, we're going to move into the panel. Thank you so much for letting me have this time to welcome you and give you some ideas and hopefully get us into a way of thinking that helps us get a lot out of this conference, because it is such a rich group of things. I am really happy to be able to introduce my colleagues, people who I've known and I'm getting to know better. And we're going to be talking about opera, Blackness, voice, and theoretical paradigms as we move into the second part of Act 1, Scene 1. What is going to happen now is we will have some featured comments from Doctors Matthew Morrison and Dr. Fredara Harris, oh dear, I can't believe it, Hadley, forgive me. And then we will have times where we have a conversation, and then we will specifically focus on questions that you put in the Q&A or in the chat. You can also put things in Slack, and we'll get those too. Feel free to start putting your comments in whenever you want to, that you want us to answer, and we will definitely be focusing on them in the second half. But now I am really happy to turn it over to my colleagues. And let me say a few words, just a few words. You can certainly read the bios, and I don't want to spend too much time focusing on those now. But let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Fredara Hadley. She's an ethnomusicologist, and one of her recent research focuses is looking at Shirley Graham Du Bois's Tom Tom. And she is an ethnomusicologist. She teaches at the Juilliard School in New York, and she focuses on ethnomusicology and American music. Our first speaker, I've introduced them in the opposite order, is Matthew Morrison, who is a musicologist and dramaturg. He is, as he loves to say, he comes from the South. Occasionally you can hear it in his voice, but he has been up north in New York for a while. He is an assistant professor at the Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music at New York University's Tisch School of the Arts. His PhD is from Columbia, and he has done a whole lot with opera, even though his training is as a conductor and as a violinist. He does a whole bunch of things. And he has this wonderful construction talking about Black sound. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to, I think, we're having Dr. Matthew is going to start, and then with Fredara. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Andre. It's really wonderful to be here in this space with you all. Thank you to everyone who is joining us. I'm sorry that I can't see you since we're in webinar form because I get energy from your faces and things. And so, but it's wonderful to have you here with us in any case. Thanks again to ICE as well as to Dr. Andre for this invitation. I am not an opera scholar, but I do have a deep and close relationship with opera that I would actually like to sort of think about today as we explore this idea and this topic of Afro-Diasporic opera. And in particular, I would also just like to say that, I'm sorry that our colleague wasn't able to be here because just to make sure that, we are three US Americans who are having a conversation around Afro-Diasporic opera, but this forum itself is really making sure to push that conversation to make sure that it is inclusive when we think about Afro-Diasporic music, not just to be that about the United States. But because I'm going to talk today about my own relationship to opera, it will be a bit of that, but it goes across the waters as well. And so I grew up in an African Methodist Episcopal Church, the first Black denomination established in the United States. And in addition to its hymn, spiritual, and gospel traditions, there were always at least one or two church members who sang opera. In my case, it was Miss Lucille Ivy. I opened this way to say that my introduction to opera was through Black Americans, and it wasn't presented as some separate European tradition that was different from other styles that we performed. In fact, you will find a number of gospel songs that were written with the singer with an operatic voice in mind, right? So as I continued to study music as a violinist through high school, I attended Morehouse College, where, again, European classical music was actually the center of my music education at an HBCU and spirituals, right? Because I was also a classical musician, a violinist there. So as with many HBCU programs as well, where the vocal performance and opera were especially the focus of study. It was here that I performed my very first opera, my first opera by a Black composer, and also the first opera by a Black composer from the United States, Scott Joplin's Tremonisha. It was also in the Atlanta University Center, comprised of Morehouse, Spelman, Clark-Atlanta University, and Morris Brown, that I had the opportunity to meet some of the most gifted vocalists that I know to this day, many of whom are performers in major houses across the world, although many also still continue to face discrimination and casting in many of these very houses. While at Morehouse, I had the honor of performing a commissioned work by a composer Nkiro Okoye titled Voices Shouting Out. Little did I know that Nkiro Okoye's opera Harriet Tubman would be premiered by a graduate of Spelman College who was also an upperclassman when I was a freshman. So I'd like to actually play this brief excerpt of Janina Burnett singing the title role of Okoye's opera, Harriet Tubman. I Am Harriet, Free Woman is the operatic aria that we're about to hear here. Okay, I am so very sorry to stop that there. You should go check out this opera for sure for yourself, and also ask for your local opera houses to stage it. It's called Harriet Tubman by Nkuru Okoye. And that was Janina Burnett singing, and you saw us just beaming with smiles here because we know Janina sings, okay? All right, so let me continue here, y'all. So Okoye's opera is one that has both potential power and presence to find itself on major opera houses stages more regularly. But there are some major houses who seem to prefer to continue to stage works like Porgy and Bess, ones that guarantee a particular audience and ticket sales, ones that also present people of African diaspora in a particular light, rather sometimes than take the time to allow the new types of work to become a part of the standard repertoire of opera houses. While we are definitely seeing more operas by people of color and Black composers in particular at major houses and within opera organizations, they are still infrequent in their programming and actually require more chances for performance and revision than just one seasonal premiere. Just like the standard repertory of European operas that have been performed and rehearsed for centuries, right? So as I continued to develop my relationship to opera, I spent a semester in Vienna as an undergraduate student where I saw dozens upon dozens of operas at the Wiener Staatsoper, or the Vienna State Opera, everything from Parsifal to Wozzeck. And it was at this time that I realized that opera, capital O, meant one thing to most people: European and maybe European American. And really, when I say European, you really mean Germany, Italy, and France, right? And so I'm just, again, sort of going on the sort of big assumptions that I learned about opera in that moment. So upon pursuing a doctoral in musicology and going to opera houses throughout the country, it became even clearer that opera carried a very specific racial, class, geographic connotation. And these connotations, unfortunately, were almost exclusive to the people of the African diaspora. So in regards to the United States specifically, and as it relates to my own work as a musicologist and dramaturg, it is significant that the birth of American pop culture during the mid to late 19th century emerged vis-a-vis the cultivation of American high culture through imported European forms such as Italian opera and English theater. Although opera was introduced to the nation through America's elite in the late 18th century, it did not attain popularity among wider audiences until after it was burlesqued in already popular blackface performances of the 1830s and 1840s. The sounds that became associated with American high and elite musical culture, or European art music and parlor songs, in relation to those that became attached to low and pop music culture, that of Black American, indigenous, and ethnic white folk music, these things helped to enforce the class and racial divides that became attached to high art versus low in US popular culture and society. And also with the rise of the middle class and within the construction of elite culture and the place that sheet music held as a primary venue for music distribution, the piano was a sort of favorite household instrument that sort of was a symbol of status and also showed who could actually afford, to own one. So as a practice of leisure and status, they would gather with friends in their parlors to perform arias and popular tunes of the day. Author Lawrence Devine notes that across the rising middle class in America, bel canto arias, bel canto arias from popular operas by Donizetti and Bellini would be performed along the popular songs of the Hutchinson family singers and Stephen Foster's blackface songs in the parlor. So opera was both a part of elite and popular variety attainment in the 19th century within the United States. So interspersed, in the wake of a newly expansive nation, however, opera became an institution that was culturally attached to the rising middle and upper class elites who sought to emulate Victorian and European manners and performance in their realization of an American high culture and class, part of the imagined and material construction of whiteness in the United States. This happens in the later 19th century. So within this developing cultural schism, blackface minstrelsy took its place as a medium through which original pop entertainment was developed, performed, and received by the masses. And likewise, opera took its place as connected to European American derived high or elite culture, things that became marked as white. But to bring us back, as Eileen Southern shows us in her monumental work, The Music of Black Americans, Black music making crosses and is often at the center of many genres, and Black classical musicians across the diaspora have existed as long as there have been traditions of Western classical music. So at this stage, I've had the privilege of working as a moderator and to help curate the Breaking Glass tour with the Glimmer Glass Opera Company that was organized by Christopher Power, where we toured a number of cities and major opera houses to discuss the operas Blue by Janine Tesori and Tazewell Thompson, which engaged important issues around police brutality, as well as Stomping Grounds by Paige Hernandez, a contemporary opera that includes rap and looks at real issues like gentrification and includes Afro-Diasporic spiritual practices. We also considered what it means to participate in what Naomi André calls an engaged musicology, where audiences make connections to historical and current events that allow for the incorporation of the shared experiences of everyone, and not just a singular group of elite individuals. And also Naomi André was our special guest scholar on this tour. So today, I can honestly barely keep up with the new operas being composed on the topics of the African diaspora by musicians of the African diaspora. This is very true, y'all. And most importantly, since the 18th and 19th centuries, there have been Black Afro-Diasporic composers like Antonio Singomez of Brazil, Jose Garcia of Cuba, and Samuel Coleridge Taylor of England, with a long line of operas being composed over the course of the 20th centuries. And we continue to see new works being performed by composers from West and South Africa, the Caribbean, the United States, and those of Afro-European descent. Just at Mount Holyoke College a couple of years ago, they hosted an entire series and where Odyssey of a Dream was premiered by Bode Omojula. And this is again based around Orisha and West African Yoruba themes. And as well as Madiba, the African opera, which is a mixture of Xhosa and English music composed by Sibio Sisa and Jeza, and this is an opera around the life of Nelson Mandela. So we have just a wide range of, in the last year or two, so many new operas being performed from across the diaspora. So I hope that this forum will give us a way to think about how to engage with these works in ways that both bring in audiences, topics, and performances together that continue to push the limits of how opera has been constructed within the history of the Western operatic canon. Administrators, audience members, donors, and artists need these types of collective conversations and the investment in them financially to make sure that opera remains accessible, relevant, and significant within the cultural lives of generations to come. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Oh my goodness, we've got so much information. Thank goodness this is being recorded because I love, and we've sort of coordinated our comments, but we're speaking individually. I can't wait to hear what Dr. Fredara has to say. But these comments about sort of creating this picture of where we are today around operas that incorporate Blackness. Thank you so much, Dr. Fredara Hadley.
Good day, everyone. I'm really excited to be with you all today. I must say, I too am not an opera scholar. I'm just excited to be elevated from the kiddie table to join Dr. André and Dr. Morrison in this conversation today. Before I get into my remarks, and I love going after Matthew because when I do, I have to rewrite everything I was going to say. So I appreciate that. And you laid out such a great spread for us in your remarks. And there are some themes that you introduced that I certainly want to amplify. Before I get into that, I want to thank you, Dr. André, for talking so sincerely and lovingly about Derek Bell. I think that he is one of I'm a proud sort of intellectual, progeny of his. I got to meet him a few times in life, and he was, for all of his erudition and brilliance, he was one of the most kind and sincere and present people I've ever encountered. And Matthew, you'll appreciate this. One of those encounters was at a lecture he gave at Morehouse College. And so I all love to Derek Bell and the past that he trailblazed for all of us. I also want to acknowledge that we're moving into the season of the 100-year mark, the centennial commemoration of the Tulsa Massacre, which will be at the end of this month, and the premiere of Daniel Bernard Romaine's They Still Want to Kill Us just last night. And so again, picking up with themes that Dr. André called our attention to about how opera has become this really important and fertile ground for us to reckon with the truth of the contemporary moment as well as historical moments. And lastly, as I get into my conversation about Shirley Graham Du Bois and she's my portal into opera and many other things. I'm thinking about Tyshawn Story's Pearl Noir, and it's centering around Josephine Baker. And one of the things I'll talk more about in a minute is studying Shirley Graham Du Bois helped me to really understand these networks of Black women in particular who were comrades, artistic comrades, collaborators, enablers, backers, and all of the ways that shows up and makes opera possible. But so many of the artistic innovations that happen in the late 19th century, early 20th century, especially happen because of these networks of Black women. So am I talking about Shirley Graham Du Bois? I will also pay attention to those networks that help to make the work of Shirley Graham Du Bois possible. Those networks largely created and maintained by Black women. And so Josephine Baker comes and performs in Africa at Shirley Graham Du Bois's invitation. And so when we're looking at how these things kind of percolate, we are talking about the diaspora. So often it is these networks of Black organizations, informal gatherings of Black people who make these invitations possible for each other. And I think that holds a lot of keys to how we should go about staging, reclaiming, revisiting works in the present moment. So I'll bring that back in a moment as well. All right, let's see. I'm going to share my screen. Just want to start with a portrait of Shirley Graham Du Bois, who was born in 1896 and passed away in 1977, and start with a quote from her own words, where she says, and I quote, "I believe 100% in the artistic potentialities of the Negro. For this, I work day and night. For this, I've taken risks, lost time and money. I know we have so much to give if only we can open channels and realize our possibilities." End quote. Shirley Graham Du Bois knew who she was, and 125 years after her birth, the rest of us are still playing catch up. Born Lola Shirley Graham on November 11th, 1896 in Indianapolis, Indiana, Shirley lived the intention she set of opening channels and realizing possibilities. In her 79 years of life, she was a teacher, composer, musicologist, playwright, prolific biographer, novelist, activist, mother, caretaker, magazine founder, and nation builder. Her biographer, historian Gerald Horne, described her as, and I quote, "one of the most versatile and creative artists and activists this nation has ever produced," end quote. She studied at the Sorbonne, New York University, Juilliard, the Yale Drama School, but she graduated from Oberlin Conservatory with a Bachelor of Music and Piano Performance in 1934 and a Master of Arts in History in 1935. She taught at Morgan State University, Howard University, and Tennessee State University, the latter three all being historically Black colleges located in the South. In her lifetime, she held citizenship in 3 countries, the United States, Ghana, and Tanzania. Although her vocation and location constantly shifted throughout her life, her commitment to the artistic, and I would add emancipatory potentialities of Black life, is the theme that reverberates throughout her life. She did give her all in the name of advocating for Black creative production, both on the concert hall and in the playhouse. And during the era of African liberation, she was a tireless advocate for African independence and autonomy. She was an unapologetic communist who viewed the left as a preferable alternative to her own country that preached freedom, yet practiced Jim Crow. She's one of the most fascinating women I've ever encountered. I could talk about her for hours, but I only have a few minutes. So I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to talk a little bit about her roles as both a composer of Tom Tom and as a musicologist, because I think those two roles work in tandem with each other and inform each other. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the foundational work that we did to set the stage for the restaging of Tom Tom, being led by Caroline Jackson Smith at Oberlin College and Courtney Savali Andrews also at Oberlin. Caroline Jackson Smith, and I was glad to see that Matthew showed us a clip of Nkiru Okoye's Harriet Tubman opera. Dr. Okoye workshopped that opera at Oberlin. Dr. Okoye is an Oberlin alumna, and Caroline Jackson Smith was her director when she was at workshopping that opera at Oberlin, the Harriet Tubman opera at Oberlin, and now will also be involved in reviving the Shirley Graham Du Bois opera as well. And Caroline Jackson Smith, also a Black woman. So again, we see this care that Black women scholars and practitioners are taking and excavating and returning works to us and birthing new works. And so I just wanted to point out that connection as well. Graham Du Bois, and I'll refer to her as Graham Du Bois, she was very, very proud to be Mrs. W.B. Du Bois, but when she wrote Tom Tom, she was known as Shirley Graham. Graham Du Bois arrived at Oberlin Conservatory to study piano performance in 1931, having already studied composition at the Sorbonne and was a divorced mother of two, so she was a non-traditional student. While at Oberlin, she creates two impactful statements, one artistic and the second scholarly. In both statements, Graham Du Bois demonstrates and advocates for the artistic potentials of her race. The first statement she makes while at Oberlin is, as a student, is the composition of Tom Tom. The opera was composed to be a part of the Cleveland Summer Opera Festival in 1932. To complete the task, she took a semester off from school and at the festival organizer's expense, and they rented her room that had a piano in it for her composition in Cleveland. She wrote the opera in 3 months. But let me add to that, she wrote the first act of Tom Tom as, not the first, a one-act version of what would become Tom Tom a few years prior while she was teaching at Morgan State University, HBCU in Baltimore, Maryland, where she was asked to write a Christmas musical for her students. And that is where she began musing about the ideas of how to connect Africa, this continent that was still unknown to Black people in certain ways, in that they weren't easily traveling back and forth, but an important site of inspiration, heritage, and affiliation. And so she writes this at the commission, as a commission at Morgan State. And then when she's given this opportunity, which is presented to her through Caramoo House, one of the oldest Black theaters in Cleveland, the founders of Caramoo House, they suggest that she be the one to compose this new work for the Cleveland Summer Opera Festival. So again, we have these networks of Black institutions and organizations helping to lead to such an auspicious premiere, such as a grand opera of Tom Tom in 1932. So I wanted to highlight that. Her three-act opera is an epic tale in which she grapples with and presents her interpretation of Black people's forced migration from Africa in Act 1 to the plantations of the South in Act 2 to 20th century Harlem, New York City in Act 3. Musically, the opera tracks and borrows from both a Romantic era and contemporary compositional and orchestral techniques, while incorporating her own arrangements of Negro spirituals throughout and cabaret songs in Act 3. The overture to the opera is written entirely for percussion, sixth timpani, I believe. Then in the third act centers on a debate of Garveyism and returning to Africa set in 1920s Harlem. If we are thinking this is 1932, this is super current and contemporary, much like we're talking about the operas that are presented during this festival, and contemporary Black operas are grappling with the concerns of the moment. She is doing the same in 1932. Tom Tom featured a 200-person chorus comprised of both professional singers and local church choirs. In today's parlance, we might call that community engagement, but she was doing that, thinking about how to tap into, again, these networks of singers that Matthew referenced that existed. They may have been HBCU graduates returning to their hometowns and populating church choirs. She tapped into that network to fill out her chorus. About composing Tom Tom, Graham Du Bois said in her own program notes, and I quote, "I have been asked how I happened to write Tom Tom. That is for me a difficult question. I cannot think of Tom Tom as either a score of music or as a piece of literature. I cannot think in terms of having written it. It is my life, not for these few years now, but stretching back through many hundreds of years," end quote. And so again, we see her reference to lineage. We see this sort of allusion to conjuring or rendering a story that is not solely hers, but one that is an inheritance that she is now able to render and present. The opera premiered July 1st at the Cleveland Municipal Stadium, and over the course of 2 performances played to 25,000 people and was broadcast on NBC Radio. It is believed that Graham Du Bois is one of the first Black women to stage a professional opera with an all-Black cast. Her debut trended fair and positive, with a reporter for the Cleveland Plain Dealer saying, and I quote, "In its present state, it impressed this reviewer more from a musical than theatrical point of view, as a great idea not quite realized, but there were moments that contained the nucleus of real beauty," end quote. And again, I point out the large audience and the stage on which this premiere happened to acknowledge the fact, especially when we're working with historical works, sometimes, especially with Black composers, we assume that they were unsung in their lifetime, and that is not necessarily true. She was heralded in her lifetime and recognized in her lifetime. The governor of Ohio attended the premiere of her opera. And so as we are doing this reclamation work, or this return work, I think it's really important that we are accurate in the experience that these composers had in their lifetime and as their works came to us. And so despite its warm reception and plans to bring it to Madison Square Garden and Europe, Tom Tom has never been staged in its entirety since its premiere in 1932. It was recently mentioned, I think it was early 2020 or late 2019, in the New York Times as one of the operas by Black composers worthy of exploration and revisiting. And so we see there where the combination of racism and sexism does rear its head and make it very difficult for Black opera composers to be canonized through repetition, right? And so you get the really triumphant and successful premiere, but you don't have those repeat performances and those tours that help to really anchor it in the minds of the populace. And so I think that is a note that we need to heed, a warning that we need to heed from the past, as we, is particularly in this clamor of staging Black opera in this moment. This premiere happens in the 1930s, in the same moment where Florence Price, William Grant Still, and William Dawson are all having major premieres as well. And all of them would, it would be really difficult for all of them to return to that type of stage and level of acclaim again. And so I can't say enough, we want to make sure that there are support systems that artists are able to build on their success, rather than have sort of bright lights and then dismissal of that success. Again, I wanted to just shout out the women who also graduated from Oberlin, who kind of buttressed Shirley Graham Du Bois in this period of time. Harriet Gibbs Marshall is the woman on the left. She's the first Black graduate of Oberlin Conservatory. And she founds the Washington Conservatory, which existed until the 1950s. And she was one of Shirley Graham Du Bois's mentors, as was Lulu Vera Childers, and who graduated from Oberlin in 1896. She helped to establish the music program at Howard University. If you go to Howard University's campus, their Department of Fine Arts, which is now led by Felicia Rashad, actress Felicia Rashad, is named for Lulu Vera Childers. And Lulu Vera Childers actually hired Shirley Graham Du Bois to come and teach at Howard University. Camille Nickerson was a classmate of Shirley Graham Du Bois, and she was known as, and she was a scholar as well, and really preserving the Creole songs that were starting to disappear from Louisiana. And so you see her dressed in the style, she was a pianist and arranger, dressed in the style of late 19th century Creole singers, and making it her life's work to make sure that that music is preserved. And so these are some of the women with whom she was in dialogue with, and who helped to support her research and helped to make Tom Tom possible. Okay, I don't want to take up too much time, but I do want to note and point to her a little bit more of her biography and what makes Tom Tom so important for her. Although she had not yet visited Africa, her father, shout out to the AME church, which Matthew Morrison mentioned, Shirley Graham Du Bois was the daughter of an AME minister. And as the name suggests, African Methodist Episcopal Church, they are one of the organizations that has a direct contact with the continent of Africa coming out of the 19th century into the 20th century. And Shirley Graham Du Bois's father and her brother live in Liberia and helped to establish the university there. And so it is her brother with whom she is in dialogue about the music that he's encountering there that helped to inform her sense of melody and rhythm in Tom Tom, as well as the exchange that she has while living in Paris and studying at the Sorbonne, yes, with Nadia Boulanger, but also being in community with Francophone Africans living in Paris as well, and talking with them and exchanging musical ideas as well. So I can't say enough about these informal networks and how they are an essential part of making sure that this work comes to us and infusing with ideas of, especially for her, until she was able to travel to Africa, as close as she could get to what she felt were genuine musical ideas. And that formed the foundation of both Tom Tom and her analysis, in which she is connecting the influence of African music, both to Western classical music and to the spirituals. She's drawing on these conversations and these experiences she's had to buttress this argument that she's making in 1934. Of course, this all comes full circle as she immigrates to Ghana with W.B. Du Bois in the late 1950s and becomes a part of Kwame Nkrumah's government. And I always say to myself, well, two things. One, Gerald Horne tells us, her biographer tells us, that she carried the manuscript of Tom Tom with her for the rest of her life, hoping that she would have an opportunity to restage it. And I can't still stop myself from wondering how might Tom Tom have shifted if she had an opportunity to revisit that work after living in Ghana and Tanzania and spending so much time across the continent. And so in our return to Shirley Graham Du Bois, one of the things that's been really important to her is that our new conversations about her include countries like Ghana, where she held citizenship and she loved dearly, being in dialogue with the W.B. Du Bois Center in Accra, Ghana, where she and W.B. are both interred, and making sure that the knowledge that we are gaining and learning is being shared with institutions, whether it's the University of Ghana or whether it is their center in Accra, in ways that are meaningful to them as they continue in their work as well. So I wanted to show just a little clip of a news story that was on Ghana News Network, which she actually helped to establish in the 1960s as its first director, where we laid and created a plaque in her honor and presented it to the Du Bois Center. And so I'll share a little bit of that video.
The Du Bois Center has unveiled a plaque in memory of the late writer, musician, and political activist, Dr. Mrs. Shirley Graham Du Bois. She was the wife of the African-American civil rights pioneer, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois.
To celebrate and bring her works to the fore, the Oberlin College in Ohio in the United States is partnering the Du Bois Center to promote her work. Dr. Shirley Du Bois was also director of the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation from 1964 to 1966.
Ghana's independence in 1957 made a great impression on Africans in the diaspora. Notable among them were Black American civil rights pioneer Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois and his wife Dr. Mrs. Shirley Graham Du Bois. The couple moved to Ghana following the invitation of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah in 1961. Dr. William Du Bois is said to have exerted the greatest influence on Pan-Africanism. However, although his wife, Dr. Mrs. Shirley Graham Du Bois, joined in the fight for freedom, her artistry and activism remain quite unknown to many. During her time at Oberlin College, she wrote a musical opera that was regarded during her time as the world's first race opera. When racial tensions resulted in the death of 3 black soldiers after she became the director of Fort Huachuca, a military base, she defended these and other men who had engaged in the protest. For many, her efforts reveal a woman who educated inspired and empowered others on ways they could use their abilities to confront racism, to bring the works.
And there you see a shot of the plaque. Wait, that's his.
This early activist to recognition, a plaque has been unveiled at the Du Bois Center in Accra in her honor. The Oberlin College, where she was an alumnus, announced its plans to partner the Du Bois Center to highlight some of the works of Dr. Shelley Graham Du Bois.
And I'll stop there because I want to make sure we have lots of time for discussion. Thank you.
Are you jamming over there, Fredara?
Thank you. This is great. And thank you so much, everybody, for putting comments in the chat. Feel free to add comments. We're going to have a little, excuse me, conversation, but please, we will be keeping our eye on the chat and weaving them in. I am overwhelmed with just happiness and joy. One of the wonderful things about this is that it brings us together. Really selfishly, I'm saying I'm glad there's a wonderful group out here, but I've learned so much. There's so much you guys have to say. I'm wondering, I've got some questions I can ask, but I'm wondering if there are any themes or points you guys want to make to each other.
I'm very excited to hear this sort of detail around the work Fredara is doing with Dr. Graham Du Bois's work, because it's stunning too. But I think that what Fredara did for us that I think connects with what I was trying to think of in relation to sort of what does it mean to continue to sort of push this US-centric relationship of Blackness, to also understand that within the US, even when we talk about Blackness, sometimes there's this unspoken sort of understanding and relationship to the diaspora that isn't always like clearly articulated. But what you did for us, Fredara, which show how Shirley Graham Du Bois and her Black US-ness could not imagine herself as not connected to the diaspora in a very specific way, right? And we get that in a lot of ways. And for me, that was very illuminating to also think about sort of, and how we also do that as scholars, but also like what that means musically and how we talk about musicians and composers themselves. It's making me rethink about how I might think about very particular US composers that I'm interested in, but how are they also thinking about their relationship to the diaspora sonically, culturally, and otherwise, you know.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Oh, absolutely. And my other kind of research hat is looking at the musical impact of historically Black colleges. And I was really glad that Matthew started with the personal and talked about how you percolated both through church and at Morehouse, and your engagement with it wasn't through this sense of whiteness that we often assume. And so I think one of the things that has become really important to me as lots of institutions are talking about Black stuff and all of that, is to not assume deprivation about approaching Black audiences, because everything that I've learned, both from my own experience and certainly from scholars like Eileen Southern, Maud Cooney-Hare, Shirley Graham Du Bois, and so many others, is that there is community practice of classical music that exists in lots of different ways in Black communities. And so when we assume that this idiom is a stranger to people, it is ahistorical very often, right? And what I think is a better position is to perhaps create frameworks that account for the experiences like the one Matthew described, right? I was watching the Marian Anderson PBS documentary, Voice of Freedom, and that came through really strongly in talking about her background. It was her Black, I think it was a Baptist church in Philly, but her Black church in Philly and touring HBCUs throughout the South that really sustained her and sharpened her until she could perform on, you know, opera's main stages and places like that. And so, you know, where I find myself, and Matthew's comments validated this, is expanding where and how we look and recognize the life of classical music in the lives of Black people. And so I think that's one of the most important shifts that we can make. Instead of plucking Black classical musicians or Black composers out of that milieu, we would do better to understand the milieu that has nurtured and made them possible in the silence and absence of white institutional recognition.
I'm so glad you're bringing these points up. Go ahead, Matthew. This is fabulous.
I was just amening.
Yeah, oh, because I think two of the big things that come out, and there are so many others, but this idea of not coming from a point of deprivation and the importance of networks and how they actually work together. I think a common narrative out there now, particularly with a lot of establishments, classical music organizations that have not been open to Black folks, is like, oh my goodness, how do we help them understand there's, Black people can like the symphony and opera and string quartets and classical music. And the issue, I think, it's not so much that Black folks don't know it and like it, it's the space.
Absolutely.
Like we love this music and we have a history of performing this in spaces that have been welcoming. And so what needs to happen, I think, it sort of hooks into this dangerous, or what feels to sometimes be a dangerous conversation of reparations, but to say we need to acknowledge that we have not been so welcoming in the past. And we need to say, not let me educate you because you know nothing and maybe you'll like this music. It's like, no, you've got a history here. And here are composers who've done this. So I love this idea of networks, and I can't help but really love how we get a story when we look at angles of Black studies and Black life, that Black women have a very empowered voice. A lot of times we're saying, where are the women composers? And it's in a white classical system. And, I want to think they're there and all, but Black women, the great thing is there's been a strong history of strength and solidarity and collaborative community building.
Ooh, Naomi, you just made a really great point that I want to touch back on here, where you said that, we asked this question, where are Black women? And it's often, as you said, within the white classical system, which takes me back to Fredara's point here, and also sort of mine, of like my understanding of classical music was that it was another form of Black music that Black people did, is what it was for me initially, right? But then how it comes sort of imagined or pulled outside of, but then even in its writing, sometimes we'll do that now where we say, oh, it's hard to find, and they're not included in. If you look in certain histories, particularly if you look at the writings and the works of Black writers and performers and musicians and composers over time, you'll find that sometimes you may have missed, that this big composer, this composer now who is, all the rage, among white classical circles, has been a continuous part of the way that Black musical and classical circles have developed over these long lines, right? And so I just want to make sure that we're sort of thinking about what does it mean to both have these sort of segregated ideas of how classical music exists, but how they really exist in tandem, but then they also still are segregated in the larger power structures and systems that actually define the way that we understand largely how classical music functions, right? I just wanted to sort of point to that point you made there.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. No, you've explored it, like you've taken it further. Dr.
I just wanted to add real quick, Matthew, to your point about where we look for people. When I taught a course on Shirley Graham Du Bois, we co-taught, my colleague Tamika Nunley, a historian, and I, we co-taught companion courses on Shirley Graham Du Bois a couple of years ago. And I used Brittany Cooper's brilliant work, Beyond Respectability, on race women. And she has this term called an eclectic archive. And she talks about that issue of when we are looking for Black women specifically, we have to remember the practices of exclusion in those white male spaces. And so when we want to engage the thought, the intellectual history of Black women from that era, we need to look at what she calls an eclectic archive, which can include the organizations that Black women created for themselves, and the mission of those organizations, their letters and correspondence, their artistry, because they weren't matriculating through graduate programs and writing books in the same way. And so she says that specifically to counter this assumption of absence or silence. And I found that to be a really effective way to wrap my mind around it. And to that point, I wanted to shout out another type of organization. After Tom Tom's premiere, her sorority, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, of which I am also a member, was instrumental though, as a national organization and hosting her to perform recitals around the country. So when I started digging into the archive, you see all of these postings about the Detroit chapter welcoming her to give her recital, Pittsburgh, Chicago. And so there, again, this whole network of performances that she was able to do, and they would bill her as, you know, a member of the organization and a famed opera composer. They were very proud of that, right? And then the last thing, Matthew's work reminds us of this too. Classical music, we all know, can tend to be very purist, and Black music by aesthetic and by necessity often isn't what we would think of as purely classical in its musicological trait. It is often in dialogue with other types of music of that era. And I think that that is something we need to be mindful of. And Dr. André, to your point about kind of how this is treated institutionally in the moment and sort of how Black audiences haven't felt welcome, I think we need to, institutions must ask themselves, what is their true intention? Are they just trying to come up with a Black program, or do they really want to welcome in and find ways to build and be in dialogue and community with Black audiences? Those are related goals. They aren't the same goal. So I think that, you know, that is a question that institutions have to be honest about.
You are saying something so important as you're linking the conversation, and also interestingly anticipating some of the conversation that is happening in the chat. So we have something that just popped up, this idea of, oh man, it is hard to do this moderating with all, I just wish we were all in the same room and we could talk and raise hands, but okay, I'm doing my best here. So this idea of, Stefan talks about, he says, I was born Black and never ever thought I would be anything else. As such, I've taken it for granted, perhaps. I've studied non-Black things and cultures without fear, because there would never be escape from my Blackness per se. And it seems prudent to have knowledge of other things, but I have never been intentional about Blackness and my conviction to other Black folks, and have not sought to preserve some of the cultures and institutions that have not been allowed to flourish or that have otherwise been under assault. This gives me a perspective. So I appreciate the complexity in this comment, because one of the things, we have many themes coming together. The importance, when Dr. Hadley was just saying at the end, how much is this current motion, this direction, the energies to try to say, yes, we know about Juneteenth. Yes, we know about Tulsa. Yes, we have a Black person on our, roster. How much of that is really this idea of not attacking what we see on the surface, but really going to the deeper issues of, when you bring Black people in, don't bring one, bring several, have a conversation. And then here with Stefan saying Blackness, like, please, one of the things I'm hearing in this comment is, please just don't assume I'm, this idea of Blackness, that there's only one. And this conversation we're having, Matthew was first learning about classical music in all Black settings, in Black churches, in Morehouse, HBCUs. I mean, this idea that what Blackness is not, and that it's not okay to be an opera scholar. I even noticed it with you guys, as you were saying, well, I'm not really an opera scholar, but you are the opera scholars we need to hear from and talk to. Opera scholars frequently, and I say this as somebody who's been in the field for a while, it's a little too exclusionary. They can do whatever they want, but please realize there is so much happening, and they might not be the ones to answer it. But if we hook into these networks, the Divine Nine, which is sort of a group of Black fraternities and sororities, which give us so much information. So I'm trying to pull all these themes together. Please jump in.
Well, I think that this is really rich here. Fredara's point, I didn't have private lessons, and so when I first got when I could afford private lessons in high school, it was because I won the Omega Sci-Fi talent hunt competition, and one of the judges was a violinist, Leroy Sellers, who was like, "Hey, you don't have a teacher?"
Oh, wow. So what had you learned in school?
I took lessons very, very young, but then I stopped like through elementary and junior high and high school. And so by the time I got there, I just practiced enough through school. But he offered me my first lessons, which allowed me to be competitive to get into college, right? But it goes, I think, back to this point you're making, Naomi, around networks, right? institutions, organizations, whether they are large, small, medium-sized, if there's not sort of a diverse reflection of their personnel, that makes it even more difficult to do the kind of work we're talking about. Because if you don't have someone on your staff or board who attended an HBCU, then there's no way they can really know, unless they have some direct involvement, how critical and important those spaces are to Black communities and how much multitudes they contain, right? So one thing is that every organization, orchestra, we all know diversity, sure, but the thing is that if you are lacking certain people, then you are lacking their perspectives, their humanity, and their personhood, and so that means that you're always going to fall short, right? And so there needs to be like a real intentional relationship to what it means to have people in artistic administrative positions, to have people in programming positions and production positions, right? And in musical positions. Like, these things are as critical as having these types of events, right? And then just to sort of like think very quickly about this, it's such an important thing that Blackness is multitudinous. You cannot point it down. Even in my own discussions of Black music, people always want me to say, well, what is Black music? What does it sound like? Well, what sounds like whatever comes out of a Black person to me. I mean, I don't know what else. I don't know what else to tell you, right? So to Stefan's point, these things can be, but even at Morehouse, right, in HBCUs traditionally, we were initially really taught that the Western, classical tradition was the way. It took some pushing of both new faculty, Dr. Robert Tanner, when I was in Morehouse, to be like, hey, can we get some computer music? Can we get some hip hop? Like, it took some time. So these are things I think we continuously sort of deal with in our own imaginations of really internalized, ideas of what is white and right, to be quite honest.
Yes. I want to say that what is at stake right now, and this might be a bold assertion, what is at stake if we don't include these voices and get these experiences? We're not getting true American music. We're getting one side of American music. We're not getting the rich tapestry. And the wonderful resource that you get a lot of in Black folks is that you have this multilingual voice that knows what popular musical styles are, the urban Black styles, whether you want to call it jazz or blues or hip hop or gospel or spoken word, whatever the phrase is over the time period. And this engagement with classical music. Hopefully one of the things this conference can do, and maybe this whole year can do, is to put to rest the fact that Black people don't know, don't love, are not a part of classical music. Just like there are a bunch of white folks who don't know everything there is about Beethoven, there's some Black folks who don't too, but then there are a bunch of us who do.
Yes.
I just want to shout out Matthew one more time. When I first got to New York, one of the first places I encountered Matthew was at Abyssinian, where they were staging the entirety of Handel's Messiah, which they do every Christmas. And so, there are Black canonical works that include works by both Black composers and non-Black composers. And so we have to be, if we are serious, we will be serious about understanding how Black people come to classical music and shape it in their own image. And I also want to shout out my piano professor from undergrad. I went to Florida A&M University, another HBCU, and my piano professor, Dr. Mary Roberts, who was the first teacher who presented the music of Black composers to me for me to play. Samuel Coleridge Taylor, Florence Price, and she's still with us, and I have given her flowers repeatedly, but it is instructors like that make these connections for us. So we can't do enough to honor the work that they have been doing and are doing.
And I'm sorry, can I
go ahead, please?
I just want to add to what Fredara is saying here, what you've also pointed to, Naomi, is that, with those performances that we did at Abyssinian, they were packed to the max every year. All three parts of Beethoven's, little children, all three parts of the Messiah, rather, little children, elders, like sitting in this sanctuary, and they're like up on their feet, and
the singers were all Black.
Nina has been one of the singers, but the thing is that there was support from Calvin Butts and the administration for Jim Davis, who was the music director, and me as the curator, to pull that together. If we don't have support, and that sometimes means that these big organizations who themselves fight for money in the arts, right? For there to actually be repair, some of your budget has to be specifically about supporting these types of events in some way. If the money is not there, it cannot happen. You cannot ask for people of color, Black people, to do a bunch of labor and not be compensated for it, right? You also cannot put instruments in students' hands unless there's money to do that. And so like, and because we live in a system of philanthropy and neoliberalism, it's really hard to figure this out. But if major corporations and institutions are not setting aside money specifically for these ventures, then back to your point, Naomi, what does this mean now with your beautiful and also heart-wrenching opening? It means that we continue to find ourselves in these positions of not having access, not just to music, but to the arts and to education and to healthcare. Like these things are compounded, right? So it's an investment overall.
Thank you. Thank you. I am in this awful position of having to say we only have a few more minutes. I'm going to say something for about 30 seconds, then give you time to think of something really quick if you want to. It seems clear to me with this conversation, and to answer a question that was put in the chat, which was basically a question that we frequently get at these events: what can we do as allies and as white folks who want to help and to support this? And the biggest thing I would say is we got to get more groups like us together talking and let people listen. Don't try to pull everybody out of their communities where they already are. Come and look at our communities. There is this huge, Undine Smith-Moore's name keeps coming up here. I mean, the networks, the richness of this is information where we have a lot of Black scholars and students and performers who have this, and we have nurtured it and have loved it, and we are a wonderful resource. Come to us and ask us. All right, there's probably a couple more than 30 seconds, but do you guys have really quick things? Oh, okay, wonderful, thank you. Fredara, I wanted to make sure you were okay. I just want to thank you guys. Of course, I just want to talk to you all day and continue this. And we absolutely need to get together and do this some more. But I want to thank you guys for being free and open and having this space be a space where you can say what you're thinking. Thank you. And I know you've made it very palatable. There are more things we could say, but thank you, because this is really a big opening. And it's a wonderful way to open Act 1 of day after the prologue, our 3-day symposium. I'm also happy to say that Dr. Fredara and Dr. Morrison are on the program at other points. And so there's an opportunity to continue with this. There are Slack channels or whatever those are, Slack areas where we can talk. And thank you all so much. We have gotten off to a romping, wonderful start.